Welcome to Viewpoint on Ukraine today. My name is Tamara Rosevan, and in the studio I'm joined by Mr. Bohdan Yaremenko, a civil society activist and a former diplomat. We're going to discuss the UN addresses yesterday made by world leaders and the meeting between U.S. President Barack Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with you.
So words of encouragement were spoken by U.S. President Barack Obama yesterday during his address at the UN General Assembly. He said that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a nation is violated and the U.S. cannot stand by while this is happening. This is referring to Ukraine. And he also said that no matter how powerful the U.S. Army, no matter how much money they spend on it, the U.S. Army cannot always help every country and solve every conflict. Do you think that he's kind of contradicting himself here? And what kind of message does this send to Ukraine?
Well, we already heard a lot of different points of view on Obama's speech and quite a polar and opposite from that he was preaching UN and the civil society, or let's say the global community, instead of leading it. Also, I heard some analysis that it was the strongest public presentation of President Obama during his term in office. But he left us with a couple of quite clear messages. First of all, Ukraine and the war against Ukraine conducted by Russia is on his personal presidential agenda. It is an important issue. The U.S. is following and reacting. In terms of reaction or the way of reacting on the crisis, of course, a lot of Ukrainians would expect Obama and the United States to do more. Of course, we feel ourselves unprotected sometimes. We feel ourselves being traited because we withdrew the third largest nuclear arsenal at some point. So Ukraine
feels basically betrayed that
yes.
It's done a lot and the U.S. is not giving it more
yeah, correct, yes, because we're not receiving in response what we Ukrainians believe we deserve to receive. But at the same time, it's, at least from my point of view, the result of Obama's presentation in UN is the quite clear message that there is no hidden compromise or behind-the-door agreement on Ukraine would ever be signed with the Russian Federation. So he was quite clear, very strong in expressing his point of view that U.S. is not protecting economic or any other interest in Ukraine. United States protecting principles and international law. And of course, it's I cannot imagine the situation that United States president would change his opinion suddenly and in a couple of hours would reach some agreement violating law that would be in compromise with something that he stated publicly. So this is the most important result of Obama's presentation.
Right. So what exactly did Obama say that makes you so sure that he's not going to cooperate with Russia on other aspects, on other issues?
No, he was not talking about not cooperating with Russia. In opposite, he was quite pragmatic and cooperative. He stated a couple of times that they knew that it's not their idea or intention to isolate Russia, that they are looking forward for beneficial cooperation, but at the same time, the way he expressed his position on Ukraine leaves no place for compromise with Russia. So this is my understanding of the situation. But in reality, of course, we see United States' desire to, and quite honestly, this is for the benefit for the whole globe that the United States will be cooperating with Russia, because they cooperating in the issues of like nuclear disarmament, like arms control. And of course, it's for the sake of the whole globe that they would understand and trust each other, at least in those crucial issues. Of course, it would be better if they would be cooperating instead of fighting each other in Syria or in Iraq or in Afghanistan or wherever it is. So we shouldn't be afraid of United States-Russian cooperation. After we've been provided with a strong and clear message that there will be no compromise on Ukraine. Of course,
right. So, but at the same time, Obama's speech was a bit unclear in terms of diplomacy. He said that the U.S. efforts to diplomatically solve conflicts has been quite successful over the past year. And, you know, the diplomatic efforts, U.S.'s diplomatic efforts were, you know, successful the most. But at the same time, the diplomatic efforts to end the conflict in East Ukraine have failed to a point. For example, you know, in February, when the Minsk agreements were signed, fighting continued for months at a time before another Minsk agreement was signed in September. So what kind of message does that send to Ukraine when Obama says that the U.S.'s diplomatic efforts are quite successful, yet it doesn't seem like they are very successful in East Ukraine?
Well, that's, from my point of view, from where I stand, it's a sad message, which is basically proving that President Poroshenko has achieved in pursuing the whole world that Minsk agreement is the only way forward, without any clear explanation of what would happen if the Minsk agreement would fail, or what would happen with Ukraine, should Ukraine would implement quite a contradictory obligations to change the laws, the constitution, to provide one separate region with more rights than other regions, where it would lead us in a half a year. So President Obama, I believe President Obama's speech on the diplomatic solution for Ukraine is the reflection of tiny hopes that some leaders on the West have, because of their ceasefire, that we really appreciate in the situation that basically the situation, the military situation in Donbass is not as tense as it was months ago. And of course there is some dialogue taking place in Minsk or on other international formats taking place. But again, I do not believe in those approach. I do not believe in the unlegal and untruthful agreement. I mean, the Minsk agreement. And of course, we don't have any clear understanding where it will lead us, especially with the intentions of the terrorists in Donbass to conduct their so-called elections. With Russia's intentions, and it looks like that Russia, especially taking into account President Putin's speech in UN, they still adhere to the quite simple, I'm simplifying, approach, but still, the world is complicated. For the sake of the world, please allow us to do whatever we want, whatever we want. So it means that Russia is still standing or supporting the idea, or strongly basically pushing forward the idea that the globe should be divided by the spheres of interest of the larger countries, and they should be allowed to do whatever they believe is necessary. And of course we know that in terms of our country, in terms of Ukraine, in terms of European Union, NATO, the agenda of President Putin is quite simple and straightforward. He's looking for the ways of weakening the allies between United States and Europe. He's looking for the ways to make NATO and US more cooperative in terms of supporting Russia's ideas for the future. And it brings us without no, let's say, optimism, because President Putin's plans for Ukraine, we already saw in Crimea, been implemented in Crimea, in Donbass, and nothing has changed in his policies. Before we get into that,
let's discuss the meeting between Obama and Putin that happened on the sidelines. This was a landmark meeting. It's the first time they met in over 2 years. What kind of realistic and what's the best case scenario that could have come from that meeting for Ukraine?
Well, the best possible scenario would come not from this meeting, but from our ability to defend our country, both militarily and diplomatically. In terms of meeting, I already said that I see no problem of U.S. and quite in opposite. I see it's optimistic and promising that United States and Russia are trying to set up some framework for cooperation in the different regions, in the different issues. And hopefully the most of the meeting was dedicated to Syria, because it's a complicated situation which is basically affecting not just Syria and located nearby countries, but also European Union. We see those waves of refugees fleeing Syria. And of course, Russia's involvement is not making the situation even better,
yes,
or any better. So hopefully they found some way forward. They discussed their approaches, because, let's say, the enlargement of anti-aircraft weaponry, Russian weaponry in Syria, of course, is not directed against the terrorists, because they don't have any aviation.
We'll have to end there. I'm afraid we're out of time.
Sure.
We can discuss this afterwards if you'd like. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
This has been Mr. Bohdan Yaremenko, a civil society activist and a former diplomat. You've been watching Viewpoint on Ukraine Today.